Welcome to another episode of Commending and Contending, a podcast about how the gospel of Jesus encourages us to live our lives and use our words to commend and contend for Jesus and his gospel. I'm your host, Jonathan Holt. Joining me today is Glen. Hey, Glen.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Glen, where has God planted you?
So, me with my wife and my children, we are living and ministering in Roxby Downs, which is a town about 650 kilometres north of Adelaide. And it's the town's here to service the BHP mine, Olympic Dam.
How old are your kids now?
So, we have one son, Zach, who is 17, who is now living in Adelaide to finish off school. We have Lily, who is she's 14, Jackson, who is turning 11, Jesse, who is 9, and Asher, who is 7.
Wow, that's a quiverful. That's exciting. I'm
It
sure
is.
life is interesting and never dull at your house.
It is. It doesn't stop.
Tell me, Glen, how has God been encouraging you recently?
One of the great things is seeing God working in just individual people's lives. Um, so our church, we're not a big church by any means, but yet we're seeing God working in people's lives as they come up to Roxby Downs to normally for work or to support their husband or wife working um, in the mine. Uh, but yet then with a lot of isolation and a lot of distance, and also just sometimes the despondence of when money doesn't fulfill what they're hoping for. Um, People coming for that, and then they turn to God in sometimes in despair or just in the challenges of life, and sometimes they don't even know why, but they come uh, to, to to seek more about who God is, or to seek hope, and often in the trials and tragedies, um, opportunity just to point people to that there's something greater than even money and wealth, and that Jesus has an answer to the bigger questions of life.
That's super encouraging the way, you see God at work in people's lives like that. The Gospel Coalition Australia runs on the generous donations of people like you. Regular donations keep our website free and full of excellent resources. You can visit our website and just use that green Give button at the top right-hand corner to contribute to the work of the Gospel Coalition Australia. Glen, let me ask you, did you always live in Roxby Downs?
No, I grew up on the east coast of New South Wales. I grew up in Sydney and then lived after finishing Bible college. Ended up in Canberra, um, down there where I got to cut my teeth in ministry really, and through that got ordained, and then end up in Junee, a rural part of the Canberra Goulburn diocese. Um, and then after about 5 6 years there, um, the it was the position just wasn't viable financially. Unfortunately, having 5 kids, I couldn't just accept a smaller stipend, and so we had to look for other ministry opportunities. At that same time, I'd come to meet Mark Short, who's now the Bishop of Canberra Goulburn. Um, at the time, he was the director of Bush Church Aid, um, and opportunity came. Or he asked if we would consider going to Roxby, and I said no, I don't want to go there. But knowing that things had to were coming to an end at Junee, I felt obligated to tell Beth, my wife, and she said no, I don't want to go there. But we've got a habit of saying no to God and then praying about it, and God has a bit of a chuckle, and then we thought, well, why not? What's actually stopping us from going out to Roxby Downs? And so we went out and checked it out, and we both felt this strong contentment and peace at considering going out there. And that's when we through Bush Church Aid were brought out, and And we began our journey out here in Roxby Downs, and growing with the saints out here to make Jesus known to a place which is not just dry from water, but it's also just dry from the spirit and got people knowing about Jesus.
Uh, For some of our listeners, this organization that you mentioned, Bush Church Aid, they might not be really familiar with it or understand where it comes from. What is the ministry of Bush Church Aid? What sort of things do they do?
The Bush Church Aid, uh, it's an organisation which is to support rural and remote ministry throughout Australia. Um, in many places, that's done uh, in mining towns. So there's a lot of mining towns who are supporting this way, but it's not just limited to mining towns. There's um, holiday towns up the west coast of Australia and northern WA, through to rural areas, through Victoria, and just places where people may not have access to healthy Bible believing churches. And Bush Church Aid are there to support and make possible ministries which financially couldn't support themselves. One of the great benefits of Bush Church Aid is not just the financial support, but it's the prayer support, the encouragement of people throughout Australia praying, and that's how we see God at work in these small rural towns, through the prayer support, financial support, and also the physical support of encouragement as well.
Now, it's got me wondering, Roxby Downs, isolated, remote mining town. Is it the case that for you, ministry in the local church is like it would be anywhere else? Or is there particular things you need to do or think about because you're in that particular place?
Well, in many ways, like every church, we exist to live for Jesus and to make Jesus known where God planted us. But Roxby Downs is particular in that it's a melting pot of so many nations. People from all around the world come to Roxby Downs to work. We have people at church who are from Fiji, and families still back in Fiji. We have people connected to people from the Philippines and families still back in Philippines. We have people who have moved from the city to Roxby Downs primarily for work. Um, it's a relatively young town. People's identity aren't tied to Roxby Downs per se, but more they're from somewhere else, but then they're here to work, and that might be just for a season. Um, and so Roxby Downs is really a very transitory town in that people might come for a couple of years, they might come for 10 years, but about every 5 years, about a third to half of the population turns over, which what that means is both at the church, we have a high turnover of people coming and going, which then creates gaps in ministry teams and ministry possibilities as you are raising people up and then they leave. And then that also means that as you raise people up, then they leave and then the numbers drop again. Not that we're about numbers. So that's one particular challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us to raise people up, hopefully in faith and also to send them. So in many ways, we become a sending church and sending people, hopefully wherever they end up around the world, that they then look for a church and can grow in faith and look for opportunities to keep contending for the faith as well. That's one particular area. Another challenge is people's working patterns. Uh, People who are up here working in the mines are normally on a 7-day roster, 7 days on, 7 days off. Some could be on nine and five, so working 9 days and have 5 days off. And then after that, then they switch to night shift. So having people regularly coming to church could be coming every second week because then they're working. and the shift the long hours, and so they're away from their home for up to 14 hours a day. So getting that continuity and care for people can be a challenge. So one of the things I'm praying through at the moment, what I've been praying over the last 6 years, is how to express some of those goods that we love, like when Hebrews says, "Don't stop meeting together as some are in the habit of doing." Um, what does that look like in a town where people can't get to church every Sunday? And I think some of the answers I think fall down in smaller networks of people gathering around God's word, the Bible studies and community groups, sort of encouraging, building each other, spurring one another on to love and good deeds, as Hebrews goes on to talk about. And so I think that's part of the answer, is looking at fresh ways of expressing those goods of that central gathering of church each week, and also looking at rejoicing when people are able to get together, and by God's grace we're seeing people growing in their faith through that.
Yeah, that's terrific to kind of work on. What are those links and networks and connections, and how do you deepen the relationship,
Mm.
building off the unusual work patterns that mean that sort of just Sunday regularity isn't something you can take for granted anymore. That
Yeah.
sounds really positive. You've been reading a book recently, although it's not a new book, it's a bit of an older book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of the so I had the privilege just recently of leading a session at the clergy conference for our diocese, which is Diocese of Wallachra, which covers most of South Australia, and next to northern WA, I think we're one of the largest geographically areas. But I had the privilege of leading a session on evangelism, and in my preparations, I was reading Centre Church by Tim Keller, which, whilst I was looking from evangelism, it's been really helpful to think through culture, thinking through the place of how the gospel speaks into and transforms cultures, um, both affirming how uh, God as the creator will have his fingerprints on every culture. So there'll be some good in every culture, displaying God's goodness. But in there's also mixed with every culture sinfulness and ways in which that culture will need to be transformed by the gospel. And sometimes those transformations are not a direct um, word from the Bible, because those challenges didn't exist at the time of the Bible was written. So it's thinking through, how does the gospel of Jesus' death and resurrection for hope and new life, and establishing God's kingdom, how does that transform the cultures in the place that it's at? And as it speaks into those different changes in the culture, how that then raises people up to then express that in sharing the good news with other people, um, and growing it. So the principle of the book is Centered Church is more along the lines of the primacy of having thriving churches in urban and cities, because the urban and cities where people move to, whether it be to find work or so forth, but and so it opens up opportunities to then grow people in faith, and then send them back when they go back to home, wherever that might be. Which has been fascinating to think through, because that's what Roxby Downs is in a smaller setting. But some of those aspirations that people go to the city for, I think, resonate with people in Roxby Downs, coming here to get a well-paying job, to get a career, and um, possibly something that they may not have been able to get even back in the city where they can here. And then so in that same way, thinking through how does the gospel speak into Roxby Downs, which and challenge the idols that are built up, which it's not hard to see in Roxby Downs. Many of the idols is wealth, um, and ironically, coming with wealth is and having 7 days off work is then the idols of enjoyment and pleasure, because you can go away for a weekend or for a week. You can take a week off work and you've got 3 weeks. And you've got the wealth to be able to buy the toys that you want. And so it's been really fascinating to think how Jesus transformed trying to find hope in that place.
Yeah, sounds really interesting, and a good insight into those idols that pop up in a place where people are there to work hard, make lots of money, and think their security and their satisfaction is going to be found in those places. Glenn, thanks so much for chatting with us today. This has been really interesting.
Thank you.